Good morning, everyone. Like I said, I'm Katie Schwab, and I'm the co-chair, along with Rose Christ, at Cozen O'Connor Public Strategies. And we are delighted to be partnering with Citizens Union this morning to have Adrienne Adams come and speak to us and address all of us and tell us more about her vision for the city and how things are going in the city council. As you might imagine, as a full-service law firm and government relations firm, we keep a close eye on the council, and it's really been an enchanting year and an exciting year with Adrienne's leadership at the city council. She's a remarkable woman who comes to this job with just an incredible breadth of life experience, and it's really shaped her leadership and taking the council in a very positive direction. You may not know that in her background that she had worked as a corporate trainer. She has experience working in the corporate world. She also chaired Community Board 12 in Queens, really demonstrating her on-the-ground kind of leadership credibility in the community. She was first elected to the City Council in 2017, and she stewarded committees that were as diverse as the Landmarks Subcommittee and the Public Safety Committee. So her legislative chops are strong, and I think what really distinguishes her is her humility and her ability to listen to people. She came sort of, I think it's fair to say, from behind in the speaker's race. She wasn't one of the out front candidates right away, but persistently and quietly became the candidate that everyone could rally behind, and she's demonstrating that same kind of leadership now as the council has taken shape. It is, as we're all aware, a very, very unusual year because the council had significant change this year. So many council members had left because of term limits. We have a majority female council for the first time in history. And I don't think it's a coincidence that we're seeing the body that many feared would be young and rambunctious and full of maybe progressives who didn't have prior leadership experience. I don't think it's a coincidence that under Adrienne's leadership, we're seeing one, pragmatic problem solving. After a tragic fire in the Bronx, the council quickly acted to pass practical amendments to the building code to ensure public safety would be addressed going forward. When the Supreme Court took a position on abortion that was inconsistent with most New Yorkers' views, the council acted very, very quickly to ensure that reproductive rights are protected here in the city. I also think it's not a coincidence that council members who might be considered extremely progressive are finding space to approve major developments in their community because they have had the space to listen and learn about the benefits that projects bring in terms of affordable housing and jobs. So I think this is a really important time for the council. I'm very pleased with the direction it's coming, and I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker, Adrienne Adams.
All right, Speaker, it's good to see you. Thank you for joining us at Citizens Union.
Thank you.
It's also nice to be all in person again, right?
Yes.
This is great. I'm John Avalon, longtime CU board member, deep in city government once upon a time, now at CNN, but it's a real pleasure to sit down and speak with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
New York local politics are often national politics. We all think that, but sometimes it's really true. And so I want to start with you by asking about the Callahan Decree and this question of what your view is of the current shelter requirements that New York City has, seeing as how Governor Abbott from Texas is moving migrants to New York and straining the system.
Yeah, thank you, John. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
And thank you, Citizens Union, for having me this morning. It is a joy to see you all this morning. Thank you so much for welcoming me. It's wonderful to be here. The right to shelter is the law in New York, so we can just start there. We don't have a choice. We've got to embrace anyone and everyone coming to our city. We are a sanctuary city, and that, again, is the law. Now, I'll start there by just saying it's the law. So, let's just take a look at New York City's shelter system prior to the asylum seeker crisis that we have right now. We know that, particularly post-pandemic during this pandemic, we've seen an influx of individuals coming into our shelter system, into a system that really was taxed, burdened prior to the pandemic. So when we take those factors, build all of that up, put it all into this big cauldron, a system that still needed wraparound services and more work, shall we say, on the inside when it comes to the shelter itself, when it comes to capacity and more shelter spacing, because New York City was, and in some places still is, providing housing in hotels, right? So we've got both doors open to people that have no homes. So we put all that stuff together in that cauldron, in that pot, and now we impact, and we now bring on thousands and thousands and thousands of refugees seeking solace outside of their home countries, through no choice of us here in this room, New Yorkers, of our leadership, of our government here in New York. But it's the law. So this is something that we have to do passionately and compassionately. And so we open our arms as we always do. And here we are, some 14,000 individuals later as we sit and chat this morning. So we are now looking at a crisis, as we said, a dire situation. We have to start there. Now the City Council this summer held an oversight hearing, which we're going to continue to do. We actually have one on Friday, particularly dealing with the asylum seeker situation. But we held an oversight hearing dealing with DHS and the conditions of sheltering in the city and all those things. So we've been taking a look at this for a while. We have a tremendous issue right now. So all the world is watching the tents go up on Orchard Beach, right? We're wondering why Orchard Beach. We're wondering what else besides Orchard Beach, because we're going to need more than just Orchard Beach to accommodate the influx of people seeking asylum here in New York City. So it's going to take all of us putting our heads together.
Do you, it's beautifully said, but do you have a point of view about what should be done at this point?
With Orchard Beach or in general?
In general.
Well, we've got to continue to build capacity in New York City. We also have to, we can't do it alone. We need assistance from our federal government to help with this situation. It would help us tremendously if the president would take a look at the overall, let's just say the overall landscape of how we got here and how we got to a Governor Abbott even saying it's okay to do this. Can you imagine 10 years ago? I can't imagine the United States saying 10 years ago it's okay for any governor to now say that I don't want my borders, I want my borders now to be closed and yours to be open and this just to be the way that it is. This is not the way this country operates. We are not in a normal place in the United States. And we can really talk about that if we want to get really deep. The United States isn't normal anymore. It's upside down because of Donald Trump. Yeah, I said it. So things are different. People are fearful. We don't want to say no anymore. And I may be talking out of turn, I'm sorry, it's early. So the world is upside down because of former President Donald Trump. And things are just different now. And so there's that freedom to just do things that we would never do before. And we need for President Joseph Biden to kind of take the reins and right this thing.
Okay, so you think the president should start via the DOJ perhaps stopping, governors from moving migrants across borders. Good. You mentioned homelessness. Do you think homelessness has gotten worse in the last year? And if so, what do you think the City Council can help do about it?
Yeah, homelessness definitely is increasing And it's not just in New York City. We take a look at the scope across the country. It's not just us. So we really start to need to look at everything in a more holistic view and not just isolate New York City and say, oh, New York has problems with crime, we've got problems with housing, we've got problems with homelessness and all that. It's this country that we've got issues now, and I'm going to point the fingers to coronavirus. I'm going to point the finger to the pandemic that has plummeted this country into places that we've never seen before. This is a place that we've never been before. So this is uncharted water, this pandemic, and it's brought us to a realization that we can never say never, and that it's never going to happen here. It's never going to happen to us. But now that it has, this is a wake-up call and a real teaching moment, however painful. So yes, we've got a homelessness crisis. Yes, it is because of the pandemic. We've all got to put our heads together in New York City and really worldwide, countrywide, to figure out best practices on how to come out of this. As far as the City Council, our responsibility is to govern. Our responsibility is to legislate policy and create policy to make things better and to make New York work and to make those wheels keep on turning. So we're going to continue to do that.
You're absolutely right. I agree with you about the pandemic. I wonder, one of the perennial questions New York politicians have is, do you believe there's a right to sleep on the streets?
Is there a right to sleep on? Certainly. There's a right to sleep on the streets. Is it the best thing for the health of the individual or for the city? I say no.
Okay. You mentioned crime, obviously a major concern. We've seen decades of crime decline. That has changed. Recently, we've seen actually a shift to more property crime, which is really on the rise. A lot of people point the finger to bail reform. What do you think have been the causes of rising crime beyond the pandemic? And do you think bail reform has contributed to that? Unintentionally, obviously.
Yeah, bail reform is definitely on the hearts and minds of many. I think that though while it plays a role, it's been scapegoated as well as being the end-all be-all issue and problem, and this is why. And if we've got a recidivism problem, let's deal with that. Bail reform specifically dealt with inequities of individuals sitting and not being able to pay to afford to pay where other people could afford to pay. All right, so I don't think that we should be using money as a factor to set certain classes here and certain classes other places. So that is the line of bail reform. We might have had a residue because of some of the things that might have flicked off of that. But the bottom line is bail reform has been equity in these spaces. So I guess my answer is a little bit of yes, a little bit of no. I don't think that we should scapegoat bail reform as the end-all, be-all, bottom line issue to what is going on.
So I hear that. Let me press you for specifics. If we were to take, I think what you're saying is amend it, don't end it approach,
Correct.
going through Albany.
Correct.
Mayors have this opinion, governors have this opinion. New York is the only state, I looked this up the other day, New York's the only state in the country where judges don't have discretion when it comes to dangerousness, which is a subjective category, but rooted in a person's record, current mental health, etc. Do you think that discretion should be on judges' plates, and that could help address the small number of folks who are recidivists but seem to have an outside impact?
Full disclosure, family member is a judge.
Okay.
And we spoke about this when we saw this kind of coming down the pipe 2 years ago. And for purely selfish reasons, I'm going to say yes. I think that our judges have the mind to deal with this issue. This is what those robes are for in those chambers. And I think that we need to afford them the full capacity to do what it is that they are supposed to do.
There you go. All right. I want to talk about election reform. This is near and dear to CU's heart and mine, and there are a lot of different ways to go about this. First, I want to get your take on the Board of Elections. I know it's an issue of home rule wrapped up in Albany, but this thing has been a perennial mess. I pull articles going back literally 100 years saying the exact same stuff as that we're dealing with now. It's a patronage organization. It's inefficient and ineffective, manages to mess up a 3-car parade. What do you think? Can the city council sort of petition the state to finally clean up and reform the Board of Elections?
Oh my goodness, that's a hot potato.
Is it?
Obviously. It certainly is something for us to consider. BOE has been around for so long. The entity itself is the reason that we're here. But there is no perfect body, all right, including my own house in the council. There is no perfect body. So yes, there is room for improvement. Yes, it certainly is something for us to consider, to take a look at. And it probably is a good conversation for us to have with our state partners to take a look at it.
That seems really understated. But because we're a wonky group and proud of it, I want to ask you about city council redistricting. In particular, what's your understanding of why the mayor seems to have intervened kind of at the 11th hour, and what your response will be?
Oh gosh. I'm going to stay away from the mayor questions.
Okay.
Because
what happened and what can be done about it?
I don't know what happened, John.
Really?
I tried to stay away. No, not tried. I did stay away, friends. I stayed away.
Okay.
Because legally and morally, I have to stay away. I'm affected by it.
Mm-hmm.
My colleagues are affected by it, so I had to stay away. The biggest footprint that I had were my appointees, and that was done away in the process as far as appointing my 5, members. What happened? Basically, what happened was the commission, which I thought did a heck of a job in hearing, over 9,500 pieces of testimony. That's unheard of.
That's a lot.
This redistricting commission did a fantastic job in hearing the public. I mean, the public was finally heard. They had, of course, starting the process with the information from the census. That's where we start with redistricting, and information comes from the numbers in the census. The commission did their due diligence. The commission then had Zoom hearings, so they were actually virtual, and they had public come in as well. Queens in particular, near and dear to my heart because it's where I'm born and raised. The last public hearing for Queens didn't end until upwards of midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. For those that watched, I watched.
That's great.
With my popcorn. It's good, it was real good. So the commission did their work. They heard from the community. They heard from districts, and people that feel disenfranchised and cut off from the process because of a lack of representation. So the commission did their work. I thought they did their work beautifully from someone standing in the corner, eating their popcorn. I thought they did a great job. And then the lines came out last week, Katie, and they rejected their own lines. I'm sorry, I'm a little hoarse. It's a little emotional. They rejected their own lines. Unheard of. When I got the phone call, Madam Speaker, don't know how to tell you this. What's the matter? What now? Well, the commission came out with their lines and they voted their own lines down. Excuse me. This hasn't even been accounted for in the New York City Charter. What do you do with this? So, where we are right now, John, is that, of course, the commission went back, and now they're back at the drawing board. They will have 2 hearings next week, I believe, which will be open to the public to watch them deliberate over their own, stuff. And they've got to figure it out. They've now got to come to the council for the first time. Now, remember, we're supposed to be dealing with this real time right now in the council because we have our work to do now. Our work now is pushed off, right? So our initial look at it is pushed off and vote is pushed off now. But they tell us that they're going to be coming back to us next week, maybe a week and a half. So the timeline really isn't that terrible to deal with. But these are uncharted waters, and you just can't make this stuff up.
No, so many ways. I'm a former member of the Voter Advisory Commission, and I assume that you are in favor of increasing the number of people voting, participating in the process. Past year, we had ranked choice voting. and I think worked out. A lot of confusion on the Board of Election level. It seems to be it'd be a lot more efficient and effective, certainly looking at national models, if it were combined with open primaries, allowing more people to vote, including 1 million New Yorkers who are not registered independent voters, particularly younger voters in that category. What's your feeling on that?
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with you. When it comes to ranked choice voting, I was very vocal, just to, those who weren't watching us, was very vocal on my views of ranked choice voting. We needed more education around ranked choice voting.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's part of the reason that we didn't see a high level of participation in ranked choice voting, quite frankly. New Yorkers voted for it, but a large swath of New Yorkers who could have voted for it didn't have the opportunity because of the voting cycle, yada, 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 a lot of things around it. But the system wasn't really used this last go around. Not saying that it's a bad system, but it wasn't really used. And I think that there was an education piece that was missing. The education piece wasn't really handled quite effectively. Maybe next time around it'll be done a little bit better. As far as widening opportunities for voting, certainly. We definitely need to widen that opportunity for more voters to have access to the process because it affects everyone.
Great. I've got a few more questions and we're going to kick it to the audience. What I want to ask you about is this Medicare Advantage shift that's been negotiated between the administration and members of the Municipal Labor Council. What's your feeling on that? Because a lot of folks, current city employees, but retirees, feel very strongly that they could end up with not subpar coverage, but some things that not covered that currently are. How are you dealing with that? How do you see it?
A very sensitive issue right now. The retirees have worked and worked and worked for their benefits, and we need to make sure that they are protected. There is an issue, however, with things that have gone on, with the benefit system, and we just have to make sure that that system is not blown up, and that's going to be what we're looking at in the council, just to make sure that the retirees are taken care of as they should be. So that's right now our duty, to take a look at everything.
Okay. Lightning round, 2 particular hobby horses for me. Are you in favor of more gifted and talented schools being built, Bronx Science, kind of the jewels of the public school system?
I have to say that I am. I think that every child needs the ability to ascend and to use their gifts, to show the world their gifts, to grow their gifts. But when I say every child, I do mean every child. Mm-hmm. There should be full access to gifted and talented programs, which we do not have yet in the city of New York, which that is the problem. That's what we have to work on, access for all children, so that this playing field is truly level. It is not, right? It's not. We have certain communities, I know communities in my own district and in Southeast Queens in particular, are looking for more gifted and talented, and there have not been, for whatever reasons. We need to work on those reasons and figure that part out.
But capacity,
yes.
All right, real hobby horse, but local law level. This seems ripe for reform, if only to either shorten the duration of the time scaffolding is up, because it's an eyesore issue, it's a safety issue in some cases, and also maybe does it need to be every 10 years? This is a small thing that probably doesn't rise to your level very often, but I want to ask you about it because it seems like a small thing that can make a big difference in communities and buildings' lives.
As I look at the scaffolding to my left, isn't it beautiful?
Probably been up for 18 months.
I was going to say, the whole scaffolding, and I came last session, I dealt with this with a colleague as well, and there has to be something done for the time frame, of these eyesores around the city. We have a beautiful city. A city that is beautifully landmarked, that needs more landmarking. Yep. Someplace that tourists love to come to and take pictures of. And then you've got monstrosities like this that totally ruin your photos. So
this is the Instagram lot.
This is absolutely.
Good.
So I agree with you. We've got to take a look at the rationale behind these scaffolding. The scaffolding isn't necessarily safe anymore. Some of it's aged and it's coming down, and there has to be something done, about the longevity of these eyesores around the city, because we want our buildings, number one, to be in good repair and fixed, and number two, we want the world to see our beautiful buildings.
Great. Final question before we get to everybody. Just what would you say are your top 2 priorities? Things we haven't hit on, but things that you really want to see be a mark of your tenure as speaker.
You mentioned in opening the issue around housing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, this council is the most progressive council in the history of the city of New York. Right? I'm going to throw out there again, as Katie mentioned, we are the first ever women majority council with 31 women strong, governing in the city of New York, and the men that get it. So that is the makeup of your New York City Council. We cannot be the council known as that council, that historic council that fought against housing for those that need homes. So our legacy should be the legacy, quite frankly, that a lot of my colleagues ran on, and that was building housing. We need to take a look at how to best do that, how to do it effectively. We're talking about all types of housing, district-centric housing. So that is low affordability, mid affordability, market rate affordability for those who can afford it. But we cannot be the council that does not build housing for the city of New York when we need it so desperately. The other thing that we need to make sure that we have is education equity. Before I was elected, as Katie mentioned, I was chairperson of Community Board 12 in Queens, the second largest community board in the borough of Queens. But before becoming elected as chairperson of Board 12, I was education chairperson for Board 12. So I'm still an educator at heart. I minored in early childhood education. In college, I've got a degree in psychology. That's why I work so well with the council.
Child psychology, that's the secret? Okay.
Part of my little hidden routine. But yes, we have to make sure that the least of these, our little ones, are really, really, really taken care of in our city. We've got places in our city, which I learned about in the Bloomberg years when I was education chair, that there are just some kids that the city doesn't care about, you all. And it's really, really, it's hard to face that fact. But when you are with it, really up close and personal, there are some children that the city has not cared about traditionally. I said has not traditionally cared about.
Are you talking about special needs, or what are you talking about?
I'm talking about schools in general. I'm talking about schools that have communities that are underserved, communities without textbooks that have copies. Instead of, you wonder where your children's textbooks are. Where are your books? Oh, we have copies of, whatever to bring home to do homework. Well, parents want to study with their children, believe it or not, and take a look at the next chapter after chapter 5 in a textbook. Those of us that are old school, I like books. I'm an avid reader. I like books. I like to read. So when I'm looking at children in underserved communities bringing papers home of photocopies of work to do, that's a problem for me. And I could go on and on. I mean, we actually championed a high school in my district when I was chairperson of Board 12 that had no library. How does a high school have no library? We had to bring in the Queens Public Library and bring in the van to sit in front of the school, the library van, instead of an in-house library. So we actually championed getting a van before I became elected and had to fund a library to get into a high school.
There you go.
So, there's a lot to be proud of, but there is a lot also to be ashamed of when we take a look at the care for the children of the city of New York. So education equity would be there also.
Beautiful. Thank you. All right, want to take your questions now? Raise your hands. Okay.
Good morning.
Sure.
Madam Speaker, I'm Rick Schaefer. I'm co-chair of the Citizens Union's Policy Committee. I'd like to return to the question of low voter participation in city elections. So one of the major determinants of that is the fact that our elections are an odd number of years. We obviously have much greater turnout for presidential and gubernatorial elections, both in New York and across the country. and cities that have aligned their elections in even-numbered years have much higher turnout than New York City. So my question is, would you favor moving city elections to even-numbered years?
Thank you, Rick. There's so much that I would like to do if I had a magic wand when it comes to elections. My answer to that is definitely. And even if we take a look at what we just put our citizens through, am I saying we? I didn't do it. What just happened in the last year or so with, well, how many times did we go to the voting booth? That's insane, right? And this keeps on happening, and we've got to do something about it. It is so taxing. People are confused. People are just war-torn when it comes to the prospect. Oh my gosh, I have to vote again. Why can't we just do this all in one trip? I just need one trip, to go to the voting. 2 max. But when we start looking at 3 and beyond that, it's just too much. So I agree with you, Rick.
Okay, great question, Rick. What else? Yes, sir.
Me?
Sure, on the left. Tom.
This guy?
You, sir.
Yeah, I'm David Calvert from the Youth Build citywide movement. I just want to basically first say I agree with you that the political representation we have in New York City is the most exciting we've had in my lifetime. And I really appreciate the hard work that all the people are doing, including yourself. And I want to pick up on the idea about housing, affordable housing. And, it really is, the federal government, of course, dropped out of the affordable housing conversation in 1981, and it really hasn't done much since then in the area of affordable housing. The city, if it takes leadership to do this, should probably try to build some kind of collaboration with the federal government to try to get them back into it. But I just want to say from the Youth Build point of view and the young people, we work with the young people that did drop out of high school and are looking to get their lives back together. And our population has renovated hundreds of apartments in New York City, and 30,000 across the country through the Youth Build program. So I just want to and it's a New York City program that's spread nationally and now internationally. I just want to say, as you move forward on the housing agenda, can you build in opportunities for young people to be part of that construction operation, building that housing?
Well, thank you, David. What a great question. What a great opportunity for the city. Let's talk.
Yeah.
I'm really, really interested in you sharing more information about Youth Build. I've heard about it, and the more we can do, particularly to get our youth involved with making our city even greater, is a wonderful prospect to hear about. So thank you.
To your left, sir. Yep.
Good morning, Madam Speaker. Thank you for your leadership. I'm Vijay Dandapani, Hotel Association of New York City. My question doesn't directly pertain to the hotel industry, but in a sense it affects us. Which is
Louder.
okay. In 2019, I believe the council passed a law allowing e-bikes in the city. And the law said they cannot exceed 20 miles an hour. Now, many of them go at 40, 50 miles an hour really, and every which way possible. It affects my industry because we have bike lanes directly in front of hotels. You got to go left and right when they go. So my question is really simple. Is it possible to get licensing system for them, just so that there's some measure to check as to who has one and whether it goes at 50 miles or at 25 miles an hour?
Thank you, Vijay, for the question. That's something that the council is looking at right now. I was in session when we did pass that legislation regarding e-bikes, and one thing comes to mind immediately is that it's an enforcement issue when it comes to monitoring the speed and where the bikes are. So that's something to take a look at also, the enforcement issue, but certainly that's something that we're looking at in the council also, and what we can do to make that even better and safer.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Want to go? Okay, we've got a majority female city council, and I've not seen any female hands. Let's change that.
We must be doing really well.
Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Marianne Pizzoltola. I am president of the New York City Organization of Public Service Retirees. I'm very happy to meet you, and I'm actually very excited to be sitting next to Ms. Gautam, who I've been dying to speak to forever. We are currently representing over 250,000 retirees in the city of New York who are under this Medicare Advantage issue. And you made a comment about there was a fund that was in jeopardy, which might be why some of these, the talking points at least you've been listening to, that you would have to make certain Medicare Advantage movements upon retirees. I want to ask you to give us an opportunity to speak with you, because the talking points that you're hearing are coming from one specific place, and that's not all the answers that you're hearing. There's a reason why that fund is in jeopardy, and I want to ask formally that you call an investigation into that HISF, that Health Insurance Stabilization Fund, and how it's been used, as there is no oversight on it whatsoever. We filed a FOIL request from the Comptroller's Office on the Health Insurance Stabilization Fund, as well as the Retiree Benefit Trust. There is no oversight, and as long as the Mayor's Office and the MLC, Municipal Labor Committee, are allowed to make an agreement on how that money is to be used, it is used. And unfortunately, it has left citizens who were workers, who worked for the city for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, who are 60, 70, 80, 90 years old. I met a retiree who's 99 and lives here in Manhattan, who is now being told that she will have to be forced into a Medicare Advantage plan that she does not want to be in, which is a pure diminishment of her benefit after she faithfully served the city, as we all did. We represent older retirees and younger retirees that are on disability. I'm from FDNY. We are your younger disabled retirees. So we're the ones that have your health issues that are on Medicare or are because of disability, as well as those that are for age 65 and over. So I want to ask you to please make some time to speak with us. We want you to hear our side of the story before the MLC is coming to the council, urging you to force this change in the administrative code, which we have had since 1967, to urge a change to go around the judge's decision. So I'm asking you to kind of hit pause and listen to everything from both sides before making a very drastic change that will not only affect retirees, but will also impact every employee in the city of New York, and as well affect your ability to retain and attract city workers today, which you're struggling to do.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much, and I'm open to that.
Okay. Ms. Graham?
Hi, thank you, Speaker, for coming. It's so good to see you. I was hoping you'd talk a little bit about the mayor's PEG plan, the budget cuts that he's proposing across the agencies. Under your leadership, the council achieved historic increases in things like parks, incredible support for cultural organizations. What are you hoping to see come out of the mayor's PEG plan? How's the council planning to engage? How can we help support you?
Great question.
Great question. What am I hoping to see out of the mayor's PEG plan? I'm hoping for them to retract it. Just saying. You know, right now, we are in such a puzzle, such a quandary when it comes to our economic situation in New York. I understand having to tighten our belt, having to be frugal. My hope is that the administration has a plan behind the PEG plan, if that makes any sense. Because what we can't do is jeopardize coming out of this thing stronger by reducing headcount in places where we need headcount the most. So I really am hoping that there is a plan behind the PEG. There just can't be a PEG, and the PEG was drastic. So there can't just be, I'm hoping that they just didn't put a PEG. I haven't seen the plan, but I'm hoping that there is a plan to be presented at some point, and I hope that answered it.
Thank you.
Okay. Mark?
Well, Madam Speaker, I'm Mark Chang. I just want to say that I was a graduate in women's studies in 1985, and so 40 years later, we finally achieved something. It took this long. So I also want to acknowledge that I'm a board member of the Coalition for Asian Children and Families, and we also have historic representation in the City Council for representatives of color, and particularly AAPI representatives. And so it's really a historic council, and so thank you for your leadership. I want to drill down more into the PEG question, and specifically with respect to the Department of Education. Parents in my community are confused. They see per capita cuts based upon the per capita number of students in their schools, seeing beloved teachers leave, but also hearing from Albany that there's a potential mandate to cut class sizes and we're also facing economic headwinds. So this is leaving many people very confused and very upset. And so I'd love to hear from you what your perspective is on this issue and how we're going to reconcile some of these very complex issues.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. And thank you for supporting as well, the women. You know, the PEG issue, particularly when it comes to education, is even more disturbing. When it comes to class sizes, that is an issue for the state to handle, so we'll leave that. But the issue when it comes to PEG and when it comes to DOE has been a very, very tough nut to crack. Again, full disclosure, it's just us in the room. Anybody who deal with that? So it's been a very, very tough nut to crack because DOE is a very, very closed entity. So when we tried to work out some things over the past half a year or so, which were not so private, a lot of those issues happened because of the lack of transparency within the DOE. So as the council continues to go forward and tries to, crack more of the shell off of that egg, we are going to be requiring more transparency via units of appropriation, something that's unheard of for DOE. So that's something that under my leadership we are insisting on, and next budget cycle you'll see us do some more of that, requiring, so that there is less confusion for our parents when it comes to DOE, when it comes to the cloak around DOE, when it comes to the incredible power of the DOE. And I'm encouraged by new leadership in DOE as well. And I have to just underscore that by saying new. We have to give it a chance to work. Leadership right now is still trying to understand what they've walked into. It's a monster. So I'm willing to give leadership an opportunity to learn that thing. My job, though, is to make sure that that thing is something that we can all understand, and we're not there yet. So my job is to make sure to keep on cracking that shell as we allow new leadership to understand what this monster looks like and what it's made of. So I know I'm kind of speaking in circles, but that's really the only way that I can address that question. DOE is a monster. New leadership is still trying to figure out, what this grand monster is. But as a city council and as speaker, my job is to try to crack through so that all of us can understand what's behind that shell.
Can I ask a follow-up on that, just so I'm clear? This is a large bureaucracy,
Yes.
to your point. But given your druthers, given your background in education, your focus on it, what are 3 reforms that you would like to see the DOE make?
Reforms around the DOE. I would like to see, well, of course, transparency is at the front of it. We're going to come up with more units of appropriation for DOE. So we're going to, there are going to have to be explanations around fair student funding formula, around equity towards individual schools, who gets what and why. Those are probably the top 2, because the third just goes into 4th, 5th, and 6th and kind of morphs out into other
That's
things.
okay, we're here, we got time.
But there's a lot, there are a lot of layers, under the DOE umbrella that we just have to, we've got to be able to see what all is under that carpet.
Okay. What else? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Kara Girl from the MTA's Writer Advocacy Organization. Citizens
Can you speak up a little louder?
Hi, I'm Kara Girl. I work with the MTA's Writer Advocacy Organization, the Permanent Citizens Advisory Committee to the MTA. First of all, I wanted to thank you for baseline and funding for fair fares in the budget. And I wanted to ask if you support expanding fair fares eligibility by raising the income threshold and also increasing even more funding for fair fares to increase transit equity around the city.
Thank you, and thank you for acknowledging, the work on fair fares. Before we expand anything for fair fares, we need to make sure that everyone's aware what fair fares is. I happen to think that that there has not been an expansive campaign around fair fares so that those eligible already know what it is and know that they need to be in the program. So I would start there. Before we think about expansion, we need to reach those that are already eligible for the program to get their full capacity of the program. So I would start there before going towards expansion. And then we can look at expansion.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, and thank you for your time. My name is Katie Panzer. I work for the Times Square Alliance. The COVID pandemic has really transformed the way that we use outdoor space everywhere across the city. And as the council considers legislation that has to do with the future of outdoor dining, I'm curious how you perceive the future to roll out.
Great question, Katie. Thank you. I think that outdoor dining, and we're doing oversight over this as we speak, outdoor dining is a beautiful thing for the city of New York. I think that the characteristics of New York have to be maintained. So we would have to rein in those types of structures that we allowed during the pandemic, which were meant to be temporary. So outdoor dining should be, in my perspective, should be sidewalk structures instead of the structures that we have in the streets now that a lot of them have turned into other things which they were not meant to be. So again, I think that outdoor dining is a beautiful thing for New York, and we've got some beautiful structures right now for outdoor dining, and I see that going nowhere but up in our favor.
But focused on sidewalks, not the sort of street extensions.
Exactly. The street extensions of dining, again, were designed to be temporary, to make sure that we did not lose our businesses, that we didn't lose our dining facilities, and just to make sure that everybody was fed. We were really creative. What did we have? Cocktails on the run and all that kind of stuff. So, which is still good for a lot of people. But the structures that are in the streets that are taking up, bike lanes and parking spaces and other things that may or may not be popular to some, but were never intended to be, permanent structures. We need to take a look at reining those in.
We've got time for one or two more. Melanie?
I was hoping you could talk about some of your women's health initiatives, particularly in light of what's been happening.
Great question. Thank you. It's no secret that we, over the past few months, particularly with the overturn of Roe, we have come out so forcefully in being champions for the women of the city of New York and for the whole country with the New York City Abortion Act to make sure that women are protected, not just in New York, but that women across the country with no health care access, to their own reproductive health care, know that New York is always going to be there. We have an abortion fund right now that we just put $1 million into to make sure that we are protecting women across this country. New York has now set the bar for the nation when it comes to women's health care and protecting women's rights. And we are so thank you for bringing that up. We are so proud of that. There is no place in the nation that right now is protecting the rights of women like New York City because of the historic women majority in the New York City Council. We have also taken up legislation, a beautiful package last month that we voted on to protect women when it comes to maternal morbidity, because we know that Black women in particularly die during childbirth at rates that are unheard of compared to other women. Why is that? It's the year 2020. Well, it's because of a lot of things. And when we start to hear those stories of maternal morbidity, it becomes the story stories sound very familiar. If one woman in her 7th month of pregnancy goes to her doctor and says, I'm not feeling well, I have a headache. The doctor says, we're gonna run some tests, we're gonna make sure that you're okay, maybe we'll give you an overnight stay. And another woman that looks like me says, I have a headache, I'm not feeling well. And he says, go take a Tylenol, go lay down. In the middle of the night, anything can happen. It may be preeclampsia, it may be a number of things. It may be a burst cyst, it may be anything. And I could hemorrhage to death and die, or I could be brought in, via ambulance and, bleed out someplace. Or my child may very well be collapsing inside my uterus. 2 very, 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 very possible scenarios that have happened to women in the past. So we see the high levels of death during pregnancy and childbirth for women of color, which is deplorable in this country. So the women of the New York City Council and the men who get it put a package together of legislation that will protect women and save lives for women in the city of New York. So I really appreciate that question. We get caught up in a lot of other things, but women's health is something that will be protected in this council. Children's health is something that will be protected in this council. We are made up of grandmothers like myself, mothers to be, and women that may not necessarily want any children at all, but we all come under the same mindset that women's health is a priority and must be protected. Thank you for that.
Hi, Speaker Adams. Thank you so much for being here. My name's Taylor Palmer. I'm from the American Council of Engineering Companies. We represent about 300 engineering firms who do infrastructure in the state of New York, MTA, Port Authority, New York State DOT, you name it, our engineers do it. The mayor's talked a lot about budget cuts, hiring freezes while promoting return to work in agencies to be in, at least 5 days a week. In the engineering industry, our firms have talked a lot about agencies where some of the vacancy rates are in some of the bureaus are 30 or even 50%. And that's due to retirement, and not getting as much pay, and obviously the inflexibility of not being able to maybe work from home 1 day a week. So, as the infrastructure bill, we're expecting to get money soon. A lot of our firms are concerned that the city is not going to be able to meet the challenge because the number of experienced workers that we have is diminishing. People are retiring, they're going into private practice. So is the city council doing anything, to push back against budget cuts, but also try to make it more flexible for workers so that we could try to retain them? And when we get this money, that we can actually execute and make the city a much better place to live. So that's my question.
Thank you, Taylor. I love your name. My oldest granddaughter's name is Taylor Adrienne, by the way. I don't know what your middle name is. But good. I appreciate the question. And thank you for being an engineer. Wow, that's amazing. What the city council can do as far as cuts when it comes to engineering and folks in your capacity. First of all, we need you desperately to keep on doing what you're doing. So it's going to be incumbent upon the city council to continue our oversight to make sure that we keep you and expand those areas as much as we can. Now, we cannot tell the administration what to do per se when it comes to how they lead and manage the agencies. What we can do is continue our oversight hearings and oversight on the agencies in taking a look at, as you mentioned, salary. I think that's really, really important for the retention of workers within the agencies to protect and make sure that the salaries are competitive so that we can keep folks in the areas that we need them to be in so badly. So that's my main thing. I know that my colleagues have a lot of different ways to express themselves during the hearings, and I'm sure that they will, but it is definitely going to be our responsibility and our missive to keep you and to make sure that we do everything that we can to help to make sure that the salaries are competitive so that we can not only keep you, but that we can bring others that are as brilliant as you into the industry as well and to stay.
All right, well, with that, I want to be respectful of everybody's time, but Madam Speaker, thank you so much for joining us. Citizens Union, thank you for your partnership. Thank you all for joining us. Have a great day.